And his name is Val Worona. He's a friend of our organization. So, Val Worona.
Feeling of power. Let's try the volume. Everything okay? Everybody here? All right. Good. I want to talk about my growing up or being a young boy in Germany. But before I get there, it would be good to know how did we get there, and particularly why. So, to understand that, I need to go back in the family history to paint the picture of why we ended up in Germany, and you probably will understand that. I'll start with my grandfather. My grandfather was a mayor of a town called Masivka. It was about the size of Hershey and Helmstown put together. We had land and farm and so forth. So after World War, somebody's playing some knobs. After World War I, when the Tsar was in disarray, his regime was disarray, who was controlling Ukraine at that time, there was an opportune time for some of the people to declare independence of Russia and to have a independent Ukraine. So he was leading a petition in his area, being a mayor and so forth, and a lot of people started to agree. Well, unfortunately, Lenin and Stalin didn't agree. So what they did is they sent some agents, in fact quite a few of them, to create terror to people that were leaning in that direction. And they were joined by the local communists. There's always, no matter where you go, there's always communists. I don't know, it's like bad breath. So the communists used the terror tactics a little bit different than Al-Qaeda or Taliban in Afghanistan. What they would do if you were a meeting like this, somebody spotted you, your family and you would be killed by slitting your throat. If you were a participant, let's say like Rich, then the next position or next punishment would be you'd be crucified and nailed to the wall and your throat would be cut. The third, and it's not really that sounds that bad, but it's very terrifying. The third punishment was to be buried alive. And this is what was selected for my grandfather. He was picked up and was taken into a place to be buried alive, and fortune was with him. He got loose and escaped. So when he escaped, he ran to the house, knocked on the window, waved goodbye to everybody, and disappeared, never to be seen again. And the reason he didn't want to come in because he knew the partisans, the Bolshevik partisans, were looking for him. And if they would find him in the house with the rest of the family, then all the family would be killed. This way, he wasn't there, so they said, oh well, we'll get him next time. Anyway, he disappeared. So now my father, being 14, had to take up the responsibility of 5 sisters and a mother and a grandmother. So he started carrying a rifle, and particularly in the communist philosophy, the son is responsible for the sins of the father. You probably heard that before, I'm sure. And this was the case here. So, since he was not the primary target, the partisans came around only several times, and fortunately Dad was not home, and he made it a lot of times he'd sleep someplace in the neighborhood or whatever, because he knew they were after him. So this was the beginning of his relationship with the communists in Ukraine. It kind of grew worse and worse, and before you know it, in the early 30s, he was ex-caught. By that time, the communist government came in, and there was no need for terroristic activity. They tried, I guess, some semblance of law, and he was sentenced to exile in Siberia for 7 years. He didn't like that idea, so he escaped. And he escaped for a couple of years. Everything was hunky-dory until he got caught again. Meantime, we had a famine. We had a famine where Stalin instituted Holodomor, and where, again, a bunch of agents came down. They took all the cattle, all the grain, all the seeds, and just confiscated everything. And there was a famine, and there was an estimate from 6 to 10 million Ukrainians died. This was a way to break their back, so they no longer are going to resist Communist Party and particularly collectivization. But anyway, he escapes from Siberia and moved to Donetsk, which is an industrial city, and then he got picked up again. So this way, now, they are a little bit more careful with this guy, because he now has a bigger, longer record, so they take him to Moscow and put him in Lublinka prison. I don't know if you ever heard of that. This was a very notorious KGB prison. So he was there sitting, rotting away, I guess you could say. And then he was taken to an office, and there were a couple of people being processed to be sent away someplace. So as he was being processed by one KBG agent, and in those days it wasn't KBG, it was KNPD, yeah. Anyway, well, let's stick with KBG. We understand what that is. So at that time, well, as he's being processed, one of the senior officers walked by and says, Mr. Worona, the place where we're going to send you, I don't think we'll have any more problems from you. And this stuck in my dad's mind. He says, what did he mean by that? Well, we found out it was one of the most northern islands, way up in Siberia, and it was an island. And he soon realized that he was going to really freeze to death. He looked around, there was no provisions for any winter blankets or coats, and he started to make his plans to escape. A very intricate escape plan. And so the KBG officer that told my dad that he's going to die, basically, and there was another thing. His Jewish tailor made a coat for him. They were friends. And the coat that he made, if you can picture, your buttonholes, in between the buttonholes there was a pocket in each location. And that's where he stuck money. So once he escaped, and I won't go into that, I'm telling you, it's a very interesting story, but we don't have the time. It's not germane to the World War II. Once he escaped the island and got to some civilized area, he then used money to proceed, go through the Moscow and all the way to Donetsk and get home. And he lived, because he knew he was wanted, so prior to that, he made basically a hole in the ground. It was like a room in the barn, underground, and he would stay there during the day. At night he'd come in and spend some time with his family. And then, of course, the Axis power moved in, and he was no longer afraid, so he came out. And he also, another fortunate thing happened. Fortunate for my dad. His cousin died. Same age, basically same description if you describe somebody. So his name was Victor, so he assumed his identity, and he was living there as Victor. And this is where I first realized there were soldiers. I was just a little kid in Donetsk playing with my little puppy, and down the street come two Italian soldiers. I don't know why Italians were there, but they were there. And of course the dog starts barking. So one of the guys just pulls out the pistol and shoots the dog right in front. It took me years not to dislike Italians. But it's okay, I'm over that. In fact, I've been a member of Italian Lodge for 25 years. So. Anyway, for some reason, and Dad was never very open with information. It just, the way he was raised, he never trusted anybody with anything. So one evening, he comes home after work all flustered, says, we gotta go. So he takes most valuable possessions, some food, throws them in the wheelbarrow. I know we had cows, I'm sure we had horses. Didn't take any of that. Wheelbarrow, me as a little kid, my older sister, about 3 years older, and Mom. And we start walking. And we walk. And we walk. Then we walk 450 miles to where I was born, to Nosivka. It took us quite a bit of time. And there must have been some reason why he did not take horses, which we had. So, I never questioned him. I should have, but I never did. Anyway, we got there. We arrived at our farm home. We still had the house. The property was taken by the communists, although now it was under the German occupation. I think it was German occupation. I'm not sure about that, and I'll tell you why. So we stayed there a week or so, and then we moved into the town. And in the town, it was kind of like up the hill, there was a main street in front, but fairly far off, like from here to, Main Street here. And big church on the right, as I remember. In front of the church, there was what we call bazaar, which is a combination of flea market, what bazaar is, flea market, farmer's market, whatever. And this is kind of important why I'm saying this. So we would, just sit there and whatever. Dad wasn't doing anything. I think he still had some money, I don't know. But anyway, never asked him. And then on one day, and I'm not too sure about this, all of a sudden I see hundreds of motorcycles coming down these main streets. German motorcycles, sidecars, machine guns. They're coming down. Behind them are tanks, and behind them are trucks and trucks and trucks. So I don't know if the Nazis were moving a division or they were actually reoccupying. I never really got that straight in my mind. And Dad would say, I don't want to talk about it. And so that's what I saw. And that night, when the Germans moved into Nosivka, we had a knock on the door. Opens the door, here's a frantic man. Happens to be this Jewish tailor. Says, Roman, you have to save me. So Dad gave him some food, told him to sleep in the barn until daylight, this is what Dad tells me. I was not there to hear all this. If I did, I'd probably forget it. He says, just wait till the traffic picks up on the streets and just kind of mingled in, and here's where you want to go. So he kind of paid his debt to the Jewish Mendelmonger. I think that's what they're called, code name. And then the following day, I saw my first human death. So a German soldier climbing up the pole, doing the electrical work, and all of a sudden sparks fly, and there's flames and all that kind of stuff, and all kinds of little popping noise, and this poor guy got killed. Well, me being always a very curious individual, I ran down and I looked at him, and he looked like burnt toast. So they tried to revive him, and it was useless. So that was my first experience with somebody dying. And they had kind of disappeared a couple of days at a time, or some nights and whatever. And then I noticed that in the bedroom, I noticed like rifles, ammunition, hand grenades, and this big, big machine gun with a drum, like on the top. And I kind of wondered about that. And I think I might have asked him, and he said he was a policeman. I said, okay. I never saw him arrest anybody, never saw him investigate any crimes. I never saw him chasing Jews, like there was a special unit that were locating Jewish people and for execution or deportation or whatever they were doing. I was kind of curious what he was doing. And then, I guess at this time you kind of wonder, well, if he was armed so heavily, he must have had some relationship with Germany. So what was it? Well, the best way to answer that is a story that he told me, and I kind of remember it a little bit. He and I were sitting on this, we always sit there on a porch, on a bench, and he saw a horseman, beautiful gray horse, galloping across the city, across the street. And he had a cape. And under the cape, as he was galloping, the cape would fly up, and Dad saw an automatic weapon. And he right away knew that was a partisan, a communist partisan. So I said, well, what did you do, Dad? He said, well, rushed in, got my rifle. I said, well, you shoot him? He says, no, he says, I was afraid to kill the horse. So, you know, the value of life was not very high at that time. So what he did, though, he jumped on his horse, was armed, and followed this guy at a distance, a safe distance. He followed him, and Dad stopped by a sugar beet factory and asked the guards there, the Ukrainian, and I knew the guys. He said, I need your help, because there's a partisan just went by here in a gray horse. Yeah, we saw him. He said, I need your help, because I'm alone right now. He said, well, we're not allowed to go beyond the fence. He says, if we take our arms outside the fence, we were told we'd be shot, so we're going to stay here. So Dad, on his own, kept on following. And he noticed in the distance, this guy went into a barn. So he went into the barn, and Dad says, ooh, that's strange. So he circled around and came back, the back of the barn, because of the house and the barn. Dad came in this way. And sure enough, the horse was there. This beautiful gray horse that he was admiring. So he went back and circled around again and pretended he's coming in this way. Knocked on the door, asked the man there in charge that lived there. Said, did you see anybody come up by on a gray horse? You know, gave the description, whatever it was. No, nothing like that. We haven't seen anybody. And they had recognized him. It's a good thing that he did. And this man was a father-in-law of chief of police, because we did have civilian police. And he said, oh, okay. You know, so he went back, and then he went and drove a road to a town called Nijin, which was the capital of that state. So he went in, saw the colonel in charge of the military police, told him the situation. They went out there to the police station, and here it was already abandoned, everything was stripped, everything was gone. So my dad's hunch was right, that these were, in fact, Bolshevik guerrillas, or Bolshevik partisans. So, all right. So he had some connections, obviously, with Germans. And one of the other stories that he said was, so it's kind of interesting. He and his men, that's the other thing. Periodically, a bunch of guys would come in and they'd be talking in the kitchen and have maps there and going through all this kind of stuff, roll it up, and the guys would disappear. But on this particular situation, he was riding with his men, and he looked, he says, on my left, pretty far away, enough that you could see what's going on. There appeared to be two women driving a covered wagon, and they waved to him, and they tried to wave for him to come in. And he says the way they were waving, and their mannerism told me that they were not women, but they were men. He was very astute when it comes to picking up little details. So he said, well, we just waved them off, and they kept on going. But he circled back. He circled back and kind of seeing what these guys were doing, and sure enough, they went into the woods and they made camp. And there was a bunch of them. So Dad said, well, we took care of them, and we had no losses on our side. And no sooner they took care of them, going through all the documents and all their arms and so forth, he hears another group coming. So apparently it was a meeting place for another partisan group. So I said, what happened? She says, we took care of them. Yeah, no losses. Great. So it appears that if he was a policeman, he was a strange policeman. I would say he was more of a bounty hunter. Because all he had to do, promised whoever the colonel was, look, I'm going to kill you a bunch of communist guerrillas, you just leave my family alone. I mean, that's how what I gather. So, things got hot in this town, Recife, for him, and he said, well, we have to move. So we got 2 wagons, we packed, and started moving west toward a town called Dubno. And there were several other people that joined us, so it was kind of like a wagon train, if you will. I don't remember seeing any Germans there, but my sister, who's older, probably wiser, said, yeah, there was a German officer at the front. It kind of makes sense, maybe there was, because these guys wanted to get out of there because it was getting too hot for the partisans, because now they recognized who, or identified who my father was, and that was a good way to get out. So we started to move toward Dubno, and we went across a river called Dnieper, which is right below Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine, and this is the second time I saw dead people, but I saw dozens of them, and they were floating down the river. You know, most of them head down, but some went up, but they were all dead, and they were all floating as we were going across this bridge. I said, wow, didn't say anything because I was not really allowed to ask questions. So later on, I asked what it was, and he says, well, north of Kiev, there was an execution place called Babi Yar. And so they would collect, at the beginning of the war, they annihilated probably 100,000 Jews from Kiev, and probably another 30, 40,000 Ukrainians. These were, for example, some administrators, because all administrators in Kiev were now communists, because it was ruled by communist government, so they got a lot of nationalists. There was a newspaper in the city. It was the biggest newspaper in Ukraine. Everybody, including the janitor out of that newspaper, was taken to Babi Yar and executed. So he says, he says, I don't know, but he thinks what they were doing is bringing people from the east to this execution place, and some of them probably jumped in the water and they were shot. That was a guess on his part. But anyways, I saw a lot of dead bodies. So this was a 300-mile trip, and it's sort of, besides that, it was uneventful. We were strafed one time by a fighter plane, but either he was terrible or he was just testing us out. He just kind of went there and scared the dickens out of everybody. But since we did return the fire, he just kept on going. Maybe he was just testing us out, I don't know. So, and once we saw a lot of not old, damaged military equipment. I know one place where we stayed overnight on a railroad, there was this biggest cannon you could ever imagine. Of course, I'm a little kid yet, and you know, it seems like I could go in a barrel and walk around it, and it looked so huge. And I did see some pictures, but I thought they were only used in World War I. But apparently they must have had some to use in World War II. So we played with the old tanks and whatever until told to go to sleep. So we arrived at Dubno. Dad was still armed fairly well. And one of the things that we would do, my father and I, we'd go fishing. But we'd go fishing with hand grenades. So you pull it, I'd see how he did it, have this ring with a string and throw it, and he'd run it. Meantime, I was hiding back there. And it was very effective. One time, we got a catfish that I thought he was dead, brought it home, laid it there by the house, and all of a sudden that sucker came to. And he started wiggling, and I was so, I must have jumped this high. I had nightmares for a while about that catfish. Catfish was as big as I was. Because he had hand grenades and ammunition and so forth, and I saw I was using hand grenades, of course you develop friends. I had little friends about this big, just my size, and hey, come on, I'll show you some hand grenades. So we went up to the house. Dad wasn't around, we'd sneak in the bedroom, open it up, and see that ring? Just, if we pull that ring, we all die. So I'll pull the ring, whatever you do. Close that up and whatever. And meantime, I heard a lot of shooting. So we all run out of the house and run down the little valley, and here's a bunch of young guys target practicing. They're shooting at some targets, I didn't know where they were. There were, 18, 20, 26, whatever. They were shooting and shooting. Finally, one of the guys says, "Okay, boys, that's enough. That's all the ammunition we have." I said, "Wait a minute. I can bring you some ammunition." So we all run up there and grab a handful of ammunition, bring it down, and give it to them. And he says, "Where'd you get that?" I said, "Oh, my dad has a lot of them." Bad mistake. Bad mistake. Because that night, we were surrounded by these guys. And they were dealing with my dad. I don't remember what. I remember waking up and yelling back and forth. They wanted some of the ammunition. They're either going to be fighting for it or give it to us peacefully. Kind of. So he, being a rational man, says, "Okay, I'll give you half," or whatever. I don't know what they agreed on. So gives them half. Now these guys that were practicing, they were part of the Ukrainian insurgent army. They had a real bad business plan. They were fighting the Nazis and fighting the communists. And there were like, at the most, there were only 100,000 of them. So it was really not a winning situation. So finally, they did decide to swing with the Germans, and they formed a Police Division, Waffen SS 14th Grenadier Division. When Watchler, who was the head Nazi, they talked to him, he called for volunteers. He only wanted one division. Well, 81,000 guys volunteered. So that's enough for 4 divisions. No, I just only want one, so they picked the best ones. And they dressed them up and gave them guns, and they went to fight the Russians eventually. So, after that, things got a little hot for my dad there again, because these guys, before they joined the Germans, they knew Dad had all this guns and ammunition, and they couldn't figure out, well, how come he has it under German occupation? He must be working for the Germans. So it got kind of spicy, so he decided to get our 2 wagons and go further east. So we went so far, and at that time, the Germans were looking for volunteer laborers. And for some reason, I was reading about this one, in all other countries, he had good response, particularly in Scandinavian countries. But in Ukraine, hardly anybody responded. And Dad says, I'll go, because he had no choice. If he would have stayed and the Russians came in, he was a dead man. Yeah. So they said, okay, and they loaded us up on a train. It wasn't first class. It was, well, some were freight cars, some were cattle cars. We sat on the ground, and for the next 1,800 miles, we traveled, or 1,500, I guess, and stopped at a place called Petersburg. Now, Petersburg, it looks like it was prepared for us. And it looks like it was made to be a POW camp, because the reason they say that, from what I read and listening to the speakers in World War II Roundtable, the barracks were raised off the ground, which indicates that that's usually what they do for POW. And in fact, that's exactly what it was. So we had 2 barracks here. We were in this one, and this one was empty, but there was a bad barbed wire fence all the way around, very high, very close together, and in there, in fact, were POWs. And listening to my mother, there were American pilots, but there was only like 2 dozen. There were, in fact, only 1 barrack was occupied. I don't know why, whether they shipped everybody out and this is a new batch coming in. I never knew that. Well, they say American pilots, with one exception. There was one guy in green uniform, and he was a Russian pilot. And that poor guy, I don't know whether he was sick, injured during the crash, or just gotten beat up so bad. When they had roll call, everybody had to line up. You see him line up every morning. This guy could hardly make it, and you had German guards with actual rubber hose, just beating the daylights out of him to get him in. Well, that happened about 2, maybe 3 days. After that, I never saw him. I assume he probably died or was executed or taken to another camp. I don't know, but he was really, really in bad shape. Well, we were here a couple of weeks at least, and the kids would be playing, whatever. Dad was taken away, I guess for training, and we were there. And then I saw some of the POWs, particularly one, would walk by the fence, and if this is the fence, he'd walk by the fence, and he would drop a toy. Pick it up. Hey, nice. Second day, he did that again. So I told my mother, I said, hey, this one guy is dropping toys. And she says, that's great, but they don't have much to eat. Why don't you walk by like he does and drop him a chunk of bread? That's exactly what I did. I'm going there, looking at the guards, and drop a loaf of bread, not a loaf of bread, a chunk of bread, and he would drop some toys. And before you know it, in a matter of a week, I was the most popular kid in the block because I had all the toys. And this POW, apparently, I helped him by him eating this German bread, which wasn't very good. I swear they added sawdust to it. I swear they did, because it just never tasted well. So after a while, we had to move. And we moved into Bremenhaven, but they put us in a private home. It was totally furnished. Nice looking home. And, it's after I matured, I was thinking about that home. The only thing I can imagine, it was probably a Jewish home. They probably took the family out, and, it was empty, so they put us in. And so we didn't stay there too long, but the interesting thing is, when we stayed there, it seemed like every day, the Hitler Youth would be marching up and down with their whatever that big stick is, they'd be all marching up and down with little shorts, brown shirts, and up, back and forth, back and forth. And I used to laugh at them in Ukrainian. Of course, they didn't know what I was. It looked silly to me, but I guess it was serious for them. Then they took us to, what would you call that, internment camp. And it was a large, large camp that had 4-story building, and it had like dormitories. So nobody told me. I surmised that this internment camp was probably a military training camp for cadets or something. Or maybe it was some, but it had a big field in front, where they could march and do whatever needed to be done. So we stayed there for a little while. Nothing happened. And at this point, there was still not much bombing that I remember. Although there was, in that prison camp, there was a little, when the sirens would come on, they used to have these blimps, I don't know, German blimps, whatever, they would come up and they'd have big cables hanging down from it. And all clear sounds they bring it down. I guess they were to, prevent strafing and low-level bombing. That's to my knowledge. But here, we were there for a little while, and there were all kinds of nationalities. Guy next door to us was the same age as I, he was Lithuanian, and we didn't speak each other's language, but in a matter of 2 weeks, we could communicate. Amazing how quickly the kids could learn the language. So we were there a little bit, and then they decided, don't know why, German mind works differently. They decided to separate all these people by nationalities. So we got moved into these barracks, godforsaken barracks, right at the edge of Bremenhaven. And wasn't that far from where my father was staying. He was staying in a multi-story building. We were allowed to visit him one time a month. So he was there with the firefighters. He became a firefighter. And here we were, again, just 2 barracks for all Ukrainian families. No adult males. Next to us, however, and it was barbed wire, but the gate was open. But next to us, the gates were closed, barbed wire, and there were some guards, and these were Italian conscientious objectors. I thought only Americans had those, but I guess they had them all over the world. And what they would do is take them in a truck in the morning, someplace, whatever they did, I don't know. And we can see the trucks coming back. But they had the place screened off, so we couldn't really tell. We couldn't look in and see what was happening. So this is us right here. This is the Italian compound. And in the middle, if you can picture, and I think we all know what a butler building is, one of the rounded roofs, halfway in the ground and probably about 10 feet of dirt on top. So this was our immediate shelter in case, the bombing raid, they could run into it. And in the back I saw some naked ladies, and I kind of didn't want to ask Dad for the longest time until, I was very mature and so would see. I said, what's with those women that had no clothes on? Oh, he says, you don't know. They were prostitutes. They're kind of bringing it for the German soldiers. Okay, So anyway, that's the situation. So us here, bunker, Italians, and fun girls. Over here was a big open field. I'll get to that. So we were bombed here very often. I mean, it's just, to me, being a kid, it's almost daily. And sometimes, depending on the intensity of bombing, we would hide locally or run up maybe a quarter of a mile, and there was a concrete bunker that was totally underground that we could hide. And even though I was a little kid, I don't know, 5 years old, 6 years old, or whatever, I could tell by the siren how bad is the area going to be, or the rate is going to be, how intense, and basically when, like, run for your life, it's coming soon, or don't worry about it, take your time. So this told us whether to hide locally here or to run over there. But like I said, we were bombed so often, and one time we had horrific bombing. And we were in the main concrete bunkers, and things was a little shaking and so forth. And we came out, and a friend of mine, friends, the boys always, they don't like to walk with their mother, so we were running up ahead, to our barracks. I looked up, and they said, look at that. I said, those are human guts. I didn't know they were that long. And they were, I really didn't. I mean, human intestines are very long. I don't know, might be some people trained here, but we saw these human guts, and these poor Italians, they didn't have any place to hide. We had places to hide, but they didn't. So apparently some of the Italians never made back to Rome. So again, we were bombed, and one time it was very intense, and it was going to be very short, so we took a shortcut through the field, and it was a beet field, sugar beets, and I lost my shoe. And my mother noticed I lost my shoe, and you'd think I killed somebody. The yelling I got for being so stupid as to lose a shoe. So fortunately, all clear came, and we came out. Now the other thing that kind of was very curious that happened, one day the siren goes on and says, well, no big deal, hide if you'd like to. And I look on my right and I see 4 fighter planes, enemy fighter planes, because there weren't Luftwaffe. So the Luftwaffe comes up and they start fighting. And it's, believe me, just like in the movies or on History Channel. Man, they're doing all kinds of loop-de-loops and and we're there, yay, because it's entertainment for us. We didn't get much entertainment living in the internment camp. And don't know what happened to the other 3. But this one was being forced down, like from here to the wall. And the Luftwaffe was right behind him. And apparently he got too close. His propeller hit the rudder, and they both tumbled. Now, I'm telling this story to my boss at one place when I was in engineering, because he just finished a story about him being in World War II, and he was always a POW camp commander. Started in Africa, went all the way up through Italy, Czechoslovakia, Germany, and all that kind of stuff. So I said, Tony, I have a story, so I'm telling him the story. I said, man, the planes crashed and they were kind of smoldering, and the ambulance comes. Of course, they take the German guy first, and they pick up the Allied pilot, and they carry him right by me. And I said, man, that guy looked like toast, just like that German I saw you know, when I was a kid, and he got electrocuted. But he says, he did have a really nice white fleece jacket and he had a scarf. And, you know, keep going into a little more details. And boss starts laughing. I said, well, what are you laughing about? He says, how can a man's face be burnt and that fleece still be white? He said, he was a colored folk. At that time, I didn't know there were other races. I didn't know there were yellow races, black races, red races. I really did not know. So the only thing I could relate to was this poor German electrician being burnt to a toast. So I thought that's what happened to this guy. Well, he said it probably was Tuskegee. And I assumed that. I really assumed that. But I didn't look on insignias on the plane, so I didn't know Canadian, German, English, what plane that was. I could recognize the German. You know, that was easy. So I called Tuskegee. Well, I called a couple of years ago. They never responded well, but this time they did, because I told them the whole story. And they said, our records show that no Tuskegee flight ever made it to Bremerhaven. I said, are you sure? You know, we're going back and forth. I said, hey, I know what I saw. But then again, I said, I didn't know if that was an American plane. I don't know if the British used Pakistani, well, they didn't have Pakistan at that time, or Indians, you know. They were dark. I didn't know some other, or Canadians, I don't know, did they use blacks in their Air Force? I don't know this. So I thought maybe some of you veterans might have seen black pilots that were not Tuskegee. So anyway, that's still a mystery. They're checking on it. They contacted some guy in Africa that's American Air Force colonel that's stationed over there, but he's in charge of all their history books. So anyway, that was my experience as far as watching airplanes. Then, as the war ended, and it was very close, even then it was very close. Now we had not only bombing, we had artillery. And that was bad because there was no warning. You had no idea when they would be shelling. And one time, kids always play. We're out there playing, we're having a good time. And all of a sudden you hear this, whistle. We knew what it was. Of course, if you hear the whistle, you don't have to worry about it. It's not coming at you. So we ran to this bunker. And so did, I guess, my other folks or whatever. We ran in there. And unfortunately, there was a lady that was a little late. I don't know whether she had to pick up the baby or something. She was running in there with the baby. And when she ran in, we look at her, and she has no arms. And of course, she collapses and dies. But the bad part was, us kids had to go out and look for baby parts so we could have a funeral, because, they were kind of, old people were very religious, and you had to have something to bury, you have to, you just can't let them lay in the grass. So we were there picking up, I got a finger, this kind of stuff. But it was unpleasant. Then, about that time, after big artillery barrage, my dad shows up, and like I said, he was in Bremerhaven, and he was a firefighter, and I could add to this that he said that he had to, or all men had to go out and fight the fires as soon as the first bomb exploded. Even though there's a whole bunch of planes are coming, and they're landing all over, bombs landing. So he became feared. So we went into this concrete bunker, and it was terrible. I mean, it was the worst bombing that I had experienced at that time. That thing was shaking back and forth, and Dad would try to occupy my mind, tried to teach me how to read a watch, because there was no schools. I mean, the Germans could care less about our schools. You know, they just wanted laborers. So, you know, if you turn this and say, what time is this? I'll tell them, no. So we're playing with the watch, and then he pulls out a piece of pumpernickel and had bread on it and gave it to me. You know, after eating a sawdust bread for years, the German sawdust bread, I had this real pumpernickel. I don't know if he stole it or whatever. Might have killed somebody for it. I had this pumpernickel. I thought it was so delicious. I never knew bread could taste that well. So I ate the pumpernickel. We were kind of back and forth, and meantime we were going back. And all of a sudden there was an explosion, and I was sitting on a bench. They had benches that could be converted into bunk beds, you know. And I was thrown against the opposite wall, you know, crying and so forth. But it was such a huge explosion, and everything was quiet. So we went upstairs. Dad was holding my hand, and looked up, and here, no more than 50 feet, there was the biggest crater I've ever seen. They must have dropped, what do they call them? Blockbusters or whatever. It was a huge crater filled with water. There was enough water in there, and at peacetime us kids would be swimming in it. So I don't know why they were dropping those on the bunkers, but I don't know, maybe they thought that soldiers were hiding there. But by the time we got out and looked at all that, I looked down and I saw American GIs kind of have a semicircle. And I saw the German soldiers dropping their weapons on a pile and walking toward a designated place that they would kneel. So they were all kneeled in a nice straight lines of obviously surrender. Well, we went back to our place of stay. It wasn't luxurious. And it was now getting dark, so the GIs are going through this place. And, you know, just to check things out. They just can't ignore, yeah, there's family, but let's make sure. So they had one of those flashlights that I've never seen before, the right-angle flashlights, and kind of shining. It was almost dark. And this one GI, probably was the biggest GI that was ever enlisted. He shines this light on me, you know, and I'm scared to death. And the sergeant, I can tell he has a lot of stripes. I figured Germans and all the other nations used a lot of stripes, meaning the guy's got to be a sergeant or something. So he was talking to me. I don't understand English, not a word. So he's talking to me. Then he reaches in and pulls out a candy bar. And it was a Hershey candy bar. And I found that out the following day. It became very popular again. Because the older kids could read, you know, they could read, I couldn't read, I didn't go to school at all at that time. So they said Hershey bar. So that kind of created an affinity of me being in Hershey. So, you know, I think so, I'm not sure, but I think it has something to do with it. But anyway, our troubles were not over. We were taken taken back to this internment camp that the Nazis had been. They told you 4 stories, dormitories, and so forth. And we were there, everything was kind of cool, everything's working out. Then all of a sudden, my dad, he must have either a sixth sense or his ear in the ground or he had spies. I don't know. He says, let's get out of here. So he takes his family and we run into the woods. And we stayed there a day or two, found an abandoned cabin, no doors, no windows. We slept on the floor. And the reason we did that is because the Russian officers came in and they were looking for particular men, like my father. So there would be, and how I know that is a couple of days later, Dad says, well, you guys don't have to run, I gotta run. So he runs, and sure enough, we're standing in line, all men, women, and children. And this Russian officer with a big red star, and he's walking there, looking at everybody, looking at the papers, looking at this description of people. And he stopped at the lady next to us, which I knew. And her husband and my father were these bounty hunters. And the reason they recognized her, she was probably the most beautiful woman you could ever imagine. You know, green eyes, you know, the whole bit. Shaped like. So they kind of looked at that and they asked her, where's your husband? Oh, lost during the wars. I'm a widow. I'm lying. You have to lie to exist. So they went by, and I don't know if they arrested or who they arrested, but they did have some people they took with them. But had they picked my dad, they would have picked him out. I wouldn't be here. You know, he probably would have been shot as soon as they went over the hill, because he was really a wanted person. To tell you how wanted he was, I'm going sideways a little bit. In 1970, he's living in Brooklyn, New York. He gets a knock on the door, opens it up, and there's 2 men, and they said, we're from the government. Didn't say CIA, FBI, whatever. We're from the government. He said, we would like to advise you never to go behind the Iron Curtain. You're on the wanted list. This is 1971. So they were still after my father at that time. So this, you know, the Russians never forgive. And that's a good example. So anyway, after this Russian episode, we again got separated by nationalities, and we were put in a very large DP, or displaced person camp, in Heidenau, which is not too far away from Bremerhaven. And we were there for, I don't know, 3.5 years, and we were fortunate to come to this country. That's all I have.
Wow. I'll walk 20 feet and say, what a truck you had.
Well, survived. I survived. I do have, I don't know if anybody wants to see, there's not much of a collection. These guys that formed this SS division, there's some pictures in here. You know, the ones I said, 81,000 volunteered, and the Germans only took 20 to form this. And it was a really good fighting division. I read that in the book. There's a picture of my father with his friend Vasily, who were great bounty hunters, and a picture of me standing in front of a barrack. You can see how dilapidated they were, but at least it kept the rain out of it. That's about it. And also a picture of my father, and a copy of his naturalization paper. And this is kind of funny. It says he was born October 1st. He told us it was 14th of October. The relatives that knew him celebrate his birthday on the 10th. So one of the things that we did, and I know, for example, my brother Peter, he was born sometime in July, and they, according to documents, he's been born December 1st, I think. And the reason for that is they didn't have fingerprints, they didn't have pictures, but they had a description of the family. Where were you born? How old were the children? And when were they born? So this is kind of fit. It fit the picture. So it says, we got here. So that's about it. So if you have any questions, I'm done. What time is it? Not too bad.
We have time for a few questions, I'm sure there are some. I would like to just make a statement. We hear a lot about World War II, we read a lot about the Pacific and Europe, and many of us have been there on various treks. It's very rare to hear through the eyes of a young person and what he saw, and it's probably so terribly accurate, it's probably burned in your mind. It's just incredible. So I thank you for your great memory, and thank you for sharing with us.
Tom?
Well, I don't know if we ever had this conversation before, but my job got me up to the Bremen, Bremerhaven area quite often, and I got into these German concerns. What you were probably, where you were billeted, it was south of Bremerhaven. The Germans had built the largest bunker in the world, and they constructed the latest model submarines inside there. And the Weser River ran from Bremerhaven down to Bremen. Bremen was actually considered a port city. You would have been near that. Today, well, the British after the war, they were using those big blockbusters, like you said. They probably, aired and dropped one down where you were. The Brits tried to blow it up after the war, from inside and outside. I mean, it's like 8 feet of reinforced concrete. But there's a memorial there to the Italians, because they used Italian forced laborers. So these were the guys that you probably saw.
They were my neighbors.
And they were just like all your socialist or society types, like in Germany. They were your communists, your anti-fascists. They were not Jews, like you said, but these were guys that were considered, they weren't part of the fascist society in Italy.
This is why we were bombed almost daily, is because it was a submarine base, a very important submarine base in Germany. So, the Allies never gave up. I mean, it was bomb. And even though we were outside the city, we were kind of in a hinterland, but not really, we were towns, we were just at the end of the block, so to speak. We still had stray bombs, and
if you get back there, you can go visit that bunker, because like I said,
I don't have,
there kept it up.
I don't have fond memories of that.
Are there any other questions?
What did your father do after he left, when he was afraid the Russians would take him? You said he disappeared.
Grandfather disappeared.
Your father, when he was in Germany, and he thought the Russian guard might pick him out of the line.
Yeah. Well, he was hid in the woods a day or two until the coast was clear, and he came back. And, in fact, that actually happened only 3 times. And the unusual thing is we were surrounded by GIs, and nobody would escape. But somehow he was a sly fox. I mean, that didn't stop him. I was, 6, 7. On paper, I was born 1939 in February. I don't know. I don't know what year I was really born. And my mother only admitted to the fact that my younger brother's birthday was changed. Just, I changed. And then, oops, didn't want to tell you that. Yeah. Pardon? You're ageless. All right, thank you.
A couple more questions over here.
Oh.
Who managed the displacement
managed
Who ran that place?
GP camp.
Yes.
It was primarily Americans, and then the UNRA, United Nations Refugee Relief Association. UN, basically. Yeah, I remember, shoes were at the premium, so they would have shoes for the kids, but they made sure that the parents weren't with them, so they bring the kid in this room, says, okay, take what you want. And my mother would prompt me and say, okay, make sure the soles are leather, this is this, make sure it's real loose, she'd really give me information how to pick good shoes. But it was UN.
Have you ever gone back to any of these places to visit?
No, I really, it's not that I don't want to, I just never had really desire. I mean, if you lived in Appalachia and you had a terrible life, you really probably wouldn't really want to go back and see the shack you were lived in and so forth. I mean, that's...
What year did you come to the United States?
We came in November 1949. And that was kind of curious too, because, I don't know, because we had 6 children, and at that time immigration was very selective, unlike now. We got AIDS, coming in, all this kind of stuff. At that time they were a little bit more selective, and Dad tried his best to come to the United States. He had a difficult time. He said, no, so he decided to go to Brazil. So he already made crates, and he had Sao Paulo, Brazil written on it, big, Roman, Sao Paulo, Brazil, all this kind of stuff. And we were ready to ship out. And all of a sudden he runs and he says, good news, we've got a visa to the United States. So we just made it. Yes, ma'am.
Do you ever know what happened to your grandfather's 5 sisters?
The grandfather disappeared, and like I said, he did not wish to be found in a house with us, otherwise we'd all be killed. There was somebody that said they saw him near the Polish border, which is pretty darn far away. I don't know if that's true or not. And that's the end of it. I don't know. But we never heard anything. We never seen him. We don't know. He just fell off the edge of the earth. And my other grandfather also died in prison on my mother's side.
Did you come by ship or by a plane?
Captain Black was the name of the transport ship. So we came here, and of course there were black kitchen help, and I was just fascinated by them because I've never seen them. Wow, look at that. I'd be walking behind and looking and so forth. Like one of them pulled out, gave me a nickel or a dime, says, "Now go away,"
I can recall going to school with some DP kids. How did you get sponsored? They didn't just drop you in Baltimore and say, have a good life.
Almost. We were sponsored by some organization and had to go to Ann Arbor, Michigan. At the last minute, they said, 6 kids, mother can't work. I don't know if we can afford that. So everybody's going, and here we are sitting on the dock, basically. And finally, the Lutheran Tristan, is it? Yeah. Lutheran Tristan Association. Tressler. Thank you. They picked us up and took us to Maryland. But that's just not really World War II stuff.
So you didn't go to nursing graduate
Okay.
All right. Thank you, Val. Thank you. A couple of procedural things, to remind you that this is a,
Excuse me, here, I want to take a look here.
Yeah, that's yeah. Bill, this is his father. God, he was like 102 when he died. for a rugged life as he had, he lived a long time.
Is that correct?
Yes,
102?
102. I think Val's our neighbor. Ah.